Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Michael Gorton. Michael, how are you doing today?
I am well.
Got an amazing array of really cool things behind you. So, on top of your books,
Yeah.
I just want to point out to people. But yeah, I love anything involving space or NASA in particular. So, and Life magazine behind you looks absolutely incredible. So, thank you so much for coming on today and for chatting with us about your books and your writing experience. And we're actually really excited to kind of dive in there. So, thank you so much for coming on today.
All right. Well, let's have fun.
Yeah, let's do the thing. So we'll start with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
I am a serial entrepreneur, and I've learned in 30 years of building companies that if you want to be good, you have to be a storyteller.
Mm,
And I have always had these stories bubbling up inside of me. Some of them are business, some of them are fiction, some of them are history. But I just decided I'm going to start writing and turning them into something.
that's
and
cool.
and it's just if it was a job, it would be terrible. But it's a passion, and so it
Yeah,
drives you.
no, it's really cool. Now, when you say that, you've had this experience with, starting a bunch of companies and things like that, like what is it in particular that you find like the like good transferable skills for writing and like telling those stories?
Yeah. Well, communication, I think, is really the most important thing, because that's what we're doing when we're writing books, and that's what we're doing when we're running companies.
I think that makes total sense. That's cool. My students were very happy that you said that because a lot of them want to run their own companies. So, but they're always like, it's interesting because I just had this conversation with a girl in my class. She's like, I really want to run a company and be Fortune 500 and make a lot of money shows, but I also want to write. I'm like, you can do those, like both of those things. I was like, one of those can help fuel the other. I have a lot of people in the tech field. I know a lot of like data programmers and stuff. They go all day and they do really well, right?
Uh-huh.
And then six, seven figures, and then they're like, I just need a break. So then they end up writing. So I think she'll be really happy to hear
Well,
that.
listen,
That's really cool.
tell her that if she figures out how to be a great entrepreneur, 6 or 7 figures is nothing. The
Yeah, yeah,
reality is that, and the other thing that's really more important, and I think as a teacher you'll appreciate this, and that is changing the world is so much more valuable than making a
yeah,
lot of money. But
yeah,
if you become an entrepreneur and you do it right, you get both.
yeah. That's very true. We actually were just talking about that in one of my social studies classes. Like, like somebody had brought up like a different company and here and there, and then somebody was like, "Yeah, but the guy that like discovered the polio vaccine just like gave it away." So we were really discussing, these different entrepreneurial things with some of these other issues. But it's so funny to me because everybody always like has that expression, like kids these days. And that's always negative, but I always turn it around because I've been working in public schools now. I'm 38, 19 years now in some capacity. At first, I wasn't getting paid, and eventually I was. But that's a lot of time. It's half my life. And I've learned that kids
Hmm.
these days are actually way cooler than we give them credit for. But they were like, a lot of kids said that in my class were like, well, we want to do something for ourselves and build a company or a business or whatever or a service, but we also want to like give back. So I totally agree with you. I just thought that was like such a cool concept that they're about. So yeah, I think that's really
Yeah.
cool when people do that. Yeah, it's
Yep.
awesome. Super cool. Well, now we're gonna get into talking about genre of genres, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. So what genre of genres do you currently write in and why?
The first book that I wrote that really made any traction was called Forefathers and Founding Fathers. And the roots of that are it's historic fiction. And the roots
Oh,
of
I love
it
that.
are, when I was growing up, my dad told me that we had an ancestor who was always getting in trouble in the early colonies. And I thought, oh, that's going to be a fun story. So I started doing the
Yeah.
research, and I found out that he was the co-founder of the Rhode Island colony back in the
Oh, that's cool.
1630s, and along with Roger Williams. And he was always getting in trouble because he believed in equal rights for women, and he believed that the Indians should uh, be allowed to negotiate for their own land, and he was sentenced to death a couple of times and beat in the public square a few times.
Wow.
But that's the way it was in the early colonies.
Yeah.
And so I wrote that book. It did really well, won a bunch of awards. Brown Books picked it up, and it's right behind me here. It's Forefathers and Founding Fathers, and it was a lot of fun to write. And I think the thing that we talked about already is it's all about storytelling. If you can figure out how to tell a story and keep the audience listening and engaged, the topic matter really doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's cool that you got to like research your own family and write from there. I've never thought to do that historical fiction wise. I've talked to my family. I saw some people they did that as like a family history book that was like a nonfiction book. But I don't know. I really like the historical fiction aspect. I had a great uncle that died in Iwo Jima and had like amazing stuff that people wrote about him in a magazine. They captured different letters and stuff that my grandma wrote a letter that was captured in one of these magazines, one of these military like journals. And then, but like the
Mm-hmm.
things that they also said about him, they had like his whole article and stuff. So that's a really cool idea. I had never considered doing that. That's neat.
And Daniel, I think the term historical fiction, in my personal opinion, is a misnomer, but I
I
get
think so.
it.
Yeah.
The reality is, in my book, everything happened. But if you're going to tell it in story format, two people are sitting at a table and talking, and we don't know what Thomas Jefferson really said in a one-on-one conversation, so you make it up. The end
Mm.
result is what happened, but it transitions from historic fact to historic fiction when you turn it into a story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Even
I think my
though
soul.
that book really happened, it's still got the name fiction next to it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, it makes total sense. So I know I love the history and the historical fiction, but I definitely know that our audience members, I can hear some of them want me to ask, in terms of what has gotten you into, writing stories, such as Tachyon Tunnel and Tachyon Tunnel 2, in terms of time
Sure.
travel and science fiction.
Well, from an education perspective, I'm a scientist and an engineer. And from a personal perspective, I was a little kid who watched Neil and Buzz step on the moon, and I thought, man, I want to do that someday. And so you throw both of those into the blender, and what do you get? You get a sci-fi.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
And I watch science fiction, and there are some interesting, in my opinion, anomalies. I love Star Trek and Star Wars, but when Star Trek travels, they do what's called warping space. And as a graduate student of physics, warping space takes an infinite amount of energy. And so Scotty may say the antimatter, blah 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 is the techno jargon, but I think that when we actually travel to distant stars and ultimately to distant galaxies, we're not going to do it by warping space. We're going to do it another way. And there is a theoretical particle in physics called the tachyon that travels faster than light. And uh, and so that's part one. And part two, all of the sci-fi nerds now know the term quantum entanglement. And with quantum entanglement, you can have a particle on this side of the Milky Way galaxy and 200,000 light years away on the other side of the Milky Way galaxy. The two can communicate instantaneously. Well, at the speed of light, it would take 200,000 years for a radio signal to cross the galaxy, but they do it somehow instantaneously. How is that? And,
Yeah.
and so that was the genesis of, okay, let's create a science fiction story where travel changes. It's not warping space. It's not rocket engines that go faster and faster and faster. It is another method, and that's the Tachyon Tunnel.
Oh, that's super cool. Well, that sounds amazing. So I know that everybody's going to want to know now, what is your Tachyon Tunnel series about, and how did you come up with this idea? We talked about that a little bit, but I know people are going to really want to know, like, what's the story about, and what are the characters doing?
Yeah. Well, the first two books in the series are related, but you don't have to read the first one to read the second
Cool.
one. And in a few weeks, we're going to release the third one, but you do have to read the second one to understand the third one. And
Good
when
to
the
know.
fourth one comes out next year, you'll have to have read the first two, or
Mm,
the second one and third one. So, you always have to have a bad guy. A lot of what I want to talk about in the book is cool science, great interpersonal relationships, and tie them all together in things that people will go, wow. And so I created the bad guy as the Declan Empire that's ruled the galaxy for 50 million years. And they're ruthless and brutal, and you do it their way, or they completely exterminate all life on your planet. So that's the perfect bad guy. It's sort of like the Star Wars Death Star on steroids, right? And but there are so many other little fun and fundamental stories built into it. And I'll give you a really good example. In our solar system, we have three planets that should have life.
mm,
Why doesn't Mars have life? And did it at one time. And Venus is the same thing. Everybody thinks about Venus and goes, well, Venus is the hottest place in the solar system next to the sun. And even though Mercury is closer to the sun, Venus is hotter. And the answer to why Venus is hotter is really simple. It rotates very, very slowly. So I'm in Texas.
mm,
In the summertime, when we have these 12-hour, 13-hour days, the sun is in the sky for a long time and it gets really hot.
mm.
Imagine the sun being in the sky for 100 days or more. That's what happens on Venus. The Venus is rotating so slowly that the day is really, really, really long. And so it gets unbelievably hot there. But why is it rotating so slowly? It shouldn't be. And so in the second Tachyon Tunnel book, the ability to move into Tachyon tunnels can move you through space and time. So the explorers in the Tachyon Tunnel book go back in time and make the realization about why is Venus moving so slowly? It didn't used to. And why does Mars not have a magnetic field that protects it from the solar wind? And so that's one of the mysteries and one of the great stories in the book.
Really cool. Now, I'm curious, obviously you used your background, right, to help you in creating these books. And I know I do this a lot with urban fantasy. I have mine's almost like historical urban fantasy. I have some that are going to be set further back, but I just think that's fun, right? Zombies are going to be the reason somebody raises zombies. That's where the Lost Legion comes from for me. And then I'm going to do something with the remaining crew, right? It's just like fun, right? I love using what I know and what I enjoy and putting it in. But I know how I pull those details out of what I think is interesting and what I want to write about into the books. How do you go about that? How are you going about and thinking, well, that's a great idea? Are you doing like a note catcher? Do you just kind of pick something and then just kind of write on it there? Like, how do you pull out those types of details from your background and the things you enjoy and then incorporate them into this series?
Well, two things. One, I read a lot.
Mm.
I love science, and like you, I've been a teacher. I
Oh,
taught college level science classes, and the goal was to get all these people who are terrified of science and show them it shouldn't be that bad, right?
yeah.
So I taught an astronomy class, but there are two things that I do on a regular basis. One is I read a lot, and so there's always ideas flowing. And the other one is I have a personal goal of walking 18,000 to 20,000 steps a day. And that is a lot. That's
Yeah.
11 miles every single day. And I
Yeah.
don't do it in one burst. Right before this podcast, I did a little 25-minute walk, and right afterwards, I'll
Cool.
do another one. Okay. So, and you put those things together, but as you're walking, your brain is thinking about stuff. And you have these unbelievable smart computers, and you just lift it up and you say the name of it and you say, hey, make a note, and it takes a note for
Yeah.
you. And then when you get back, you compile them all and you start writing.
Yeah, I'm a big social media person, not for social media, but I like to learn from it. So I follow so many scientists, historians, like Just so many different people. I love cryptozoology. I love learning about just animals in general. Like they just discovered this new fish recently that they thought was like, extinct 2 million years ago. That to me is like
Yeah.
fascinating. And they actually just discovered this lizard, like a smaller one, recently. Like they're like, wait, what is that? And in Southwest East Asia, I thought that was like remarkable, like how this little thing was able to survive and like go away from people. So for me, I like tend to just like save things I see on social media. I do like very small bursts of social media for podcasts, and then I'll like share something, look something up, like something of yours, share something of yours, and then I'll go do something for 5 minutes. And then I generate ideas and I'll just save them. And then I tend to write them on my notepad. So I just wanted to point out, I think that, like you just said, right, you found what works for you. I like to point that out to our audience too. I think it's always just a really good idea to find, maybe it's the teacher in us, right? Like to find the best thing that works for you in that writing
Hmm.
process. So I think it's such a great example for yours. So it's really cool. So we're gonna go to that fourth question. I love science fiction. That's actually what I started with in terms of reading. So it's always been one of my big passions, and I love science. If I wasn't teaching social studies, I would have taught science. So what type of science fiction tropes or world building did you incorporate into these books and why?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think in terms of the characters themselves, you have to recognize that your characters aren't all the same, and they're not you. Now, they are you because you're the creator of them, but you have to constantly remind yourself. I have a main character named Megan, and she's brilliant, beautiful, badass, and you know, whenever I'm writing her character, I have to think how she thinks, and I have to constantly
Mm,
stop and say, okay, how would Megan respond to this? And sometimes what you would do is you would say, okay, pick somebody in my life or in the movies that I know who sort of fits that role model, and say, okay, how would she respond to this?
mm,
And then, it, so that's I think how you build the character development. I got told a long time ago that the authors who don't develop personal interactions are not as good an author. And I've read a lot of great books where I was I didn't really think that personal interactions were that great, but they were still great books. I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
want to pick on Michael Crichton because he's one of the greatest authors of all time from a creativity perspective. But boy, he just fell flat when it came to developing characters and relationships in his
Yeah,
characters.
yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
movies did a great job of fixing that for him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you read his books, you always walk away from it going, "Man, I wish those two had gotten together, and I wish
Yeah.
why did that?" So I think it's really important to have those interactions, those frictions, those romantic things. All of those pieces have to fit together. Um, in terms of developing worlds, that's really hard. You got to have a lot of notes when you're doing that. And
Yeah.
I'm constantly going back to my notes, going, okay, what planet, what, yeah, you know. And the great news is AI can help you with that. I can have
Oh
AI
yeah.
go in and write charts to show me all of the things that I've done, all of the timelines I've
Yep.
created, so I have a quick reference.
Yeah, yeah. I have kids ask me all the time. They're like, "Well," because I'm like, "Please don't use AI for this." And we're trying to teach them, like you're using it to avoid learning skills. How to write a paragraph or how to do some research. I'm like, I have already passed all these tests. I'm like, I can tell you this information. I'm like, I'm collecting all of my stuff. I'm like, literally have like I don't even know, like 14 years of teaching curriculum for 3 states, 7 districts for like 14 subjects. But sometimes there's really good kernels in there, right? So I'll just throw like, a particular section or a few things and I'll throw it in with like ChatGPT or like Claude or something like that. I'm like, I want an activity that
Mm-hmm.
does this and that. And, it's something that maybe I haven't done in 13 years. But I
Mm-hmm.
love doing that for my own stuff too, because I'll just be like, okay, like with world building, it's such a, like you said, I have such a big dictionary. And like, I know people use Scrivener. For me, it's harder. I'd like divide it up, but I have just taken chunks out and just thrown it in, and it does a really great job of helping you, yeah, like classify the information just a little bit better. So I think it's a great tool for that. Yeah.
It can't replace the creativity. And I'll tell you, I'll give you another example. Sort of, this is kind of in line with your current question, and that is, what let's use Star Trek for example. People get old. Well, guess what? In this Earth that we live on right now, we're probably 50 years away from curing aging. And and so now let's take a situation where we say a 55-year-old person, and I do this exactly in Tachyon Tunnel 3. 55-year-old person goes into a de-aging clinic and comes out 29. Okay, so that's
Mhm.
just, okay, there's a sentence. But now put yourself in that position. Your nose, your eyes, your touch, everything is different now. If you're 55 and you got aches and pains from playing football or running or just age, they're all
Mhm.
gone. Your hair doesn't have the gray in your beard anymore, right?
Yeah.
The and so all of a sudden everything has changed. You walk into a clinic 55, you come out 29, and you go to your favorite Mexican restaurant, and that jalapeno burns, and that hasn't happened for 20 years, right? And
Yeah.
so you think about these things that change because of the circumstance you created in the science fiction, and you bring it into the world that you've now created.
Oh, that's cool. That's a great example there. Are there other things like that that you're like, I'm curious, as a sub question is like, are there things that you're seeing now within our society that, you're like, oh, that is, and I'm sure you've seen, quite a few things too, right? Like, I never would have thought going from my friend's dad's car phone that was like this big that we'd have these things.
Yeah,
Like, I would
yeah,
have lost that bet. But are there things like that, or things that we're doing now, that you've seen over the years that you're like, oh man, like in 50 years, it's going to be like that, right? Like, are there other
sure.
things like that that you've kind of pulled in and, kind of done that way? Like, I think that's really cool.
Yes, absolutely. So in the first Tachyon Tunnel book, I have a character named Emily, and she's the computer. And the main character is Alex, and his girlfriend is Paula, and she's always saying, "You treat Emily like she was your girlfriend." And I know people who sort of interact with their AI that way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and because sometimes you feel, I mean, if you use ChatGPT enough, it sort of communicates with you. It knows the way you like to
yeah, yeah, yeah.
talk, and it
Yep.
pings back. And I have a buddy who's got one of these AIs on his computer that he showed me, and it's like, holy man, that's just like a real person, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So in the beginning, in the first book, Emily is just silicon. But in the
Hmm.
second book, they meet a race that knows how to create cybernetics. And so they move
Hmm.
Emily into a part human cybernetic body. And so that's another thing that I think we're going to be seeing. What Musk and Tesla is doing with their robots right now
Yeah.
is the beginnings of extraordinary. But where are we going to be in 10 years? Like you said, who would have guessed? The guy behind me, Buzz Aldrin, who walked on the moon in 1969, he's found holding his cell phone up and saying, "This cell phone has more power than all the computers on the Earth combined when I went to the moon."
Yeah, yeah.
Stuff that we can do with our smartphones is just amazing. And now, you can say, "Hey, whatever her name is, I don't want to say it because she's
Yeah.
not talking to me, answer this question for me." And boom, 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 you've got information at your fingertips that you never dreamed was possible.
Oh yeah, well it's like Total Recall, the original, right? Where they have like the phones and they're just like saying things, right? Like, hey, call this or whatever. And like I think it's so crazy, right? To think that people were already thinking of that type of technology. My wife does the
Yeah,
hands-free now, right? That's just a normal technology now, right? When I was a kid, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And even like the Colin Farrell remake was like almost 14 years ago now, where they had like the hand phones little like in their hand, right? And then you had the receiver and stuff. And
yeah,
now then the Bluetooth happened, right? Like right after that. Like it was really super interesting. But yeah, I always find it, the kids always ask me like, why do you like sci-fi so much? I'm like, I love fantasy, it's great, right? But to me it's interesting to see things because we're actually bringing in some older sci-fi like Asimov and stuff, which I'm Larry Niven, which I'm really excited about this year, to kind
mhm,
of dissect and to really see like and some older too. Like John Carter of Mars, Edgar Rice Burroughs is one of my favorite. Like some of the
Yeah,
things that,
yeah.
right? A lot of people don't know that he fought in the Civil War and was sitting there looking up at the moon, right? Like literally in camp during the Civil War, and then writing these books and like some of the like stabilizers and stuff that he was talking about, like in the books. People end up coming up with later on, right? With planes and different
Mm,
things like that later. I just think like it's so
yeah,
crazy to really go back when I was like, wait, did he really like say this? And I was like doing research. I'm like, yeah, he was talking about this. I'm like, we're talking right before the automobile, like that somebody's talking about this in flight and some of these things that were true. So for me, it's like always so interesting to see that. So I think it's cool that you're kind of passing on the baton, right, for your series as well with some of these things. Because to
right.
me, that's always the exciting part is seeing the tech and kind of, really seeing like, are we going to catch up? Hoverboards, right, from Back to the Future. I always thought that was like the coolest thing as a kid. I always wanted one of those, and now as a kid,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, it's just,
yeah,
or like the sneakers, right?
yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
self-drying clothes, that kind of thing.
I know. Unbelievable.
I just want to go back too, because when you were talking about, like Star Trek, and I found this really difficult, was like, how are people, I was like, I want to do something realistic. For like how people are transporting themselves from galaxy to galaxy or planet to planet, solar system to solar
Mhm.
system. And the more I researched, I was like, this stuff is just not really like what is it, the FTL drive? Like I was looking at a lot of different things. I have seen this recently with like Ness Brown's Scourge of the Stars, where literally like it is more realistic. But I'm curious that do you still have that type of travel as well, or just the tachyon tunnels? Is there like a mixture of that kind of technology, going from like planet to planet or place to place?
That's great that you asked that because the reality is once we master it, we don't need anything else. And it's something that in the second Tachyon Tunnel book I started developing
Mm.
was a simple backpack that could take you a certain distance. So it takes
Yeah.
power, and power has to be in your pack.
Mm.
And so you can travel certain distances. But the other thing we did in the second book was we created this thing called T Portal, which you could use on Earth to move things from place to place instantly. So you step into a portal in Dallas, and the next step is out of a portal in Beijing or Paris. And so what that means is you could now live in Dallas and work in Paris,
Mm.
and not have the 5 hour, 8 hour, 10 hour flight. It's just
Right.
instantaneous, and you're there. And and so you get to the point where you think, why would we use anything else?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you think about rockets right now. It takes a lot of energy to get things from up to orbit. And if you had a tachyon portal that you could carry stuff on, you could build space stations as big as you wanted up there.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm. I always find it interesting, like with Stargate SG-1, like just as an example of having the Stargates, right, where people are going through, right, so that way they're not having to, like one of the seasons, I think it's like season 3 or 4, like they literally talk to one of the alien groups, right, like how come you're using the Stargates instead of, and they actually have Stargates at one point, like on like the bigger ships or whatever in one of the seasons,
yeah,
in one of the shows. But it's interesting, right? Where they're like, yeah, why would we like have to re-enter, right? Like with these big ships and things, like it's just easier just to
mhm,
use a like a Stargate. And I was like, man, that's like a
yeah,
really good point. Like, why are you gonna constantly like even like the smaller subships and stuff? Eventually they kind of like go to the wayside. Like I'm sure that had to do with funding and stuff for the show. But it was funny how they wrote that into the
right.
story was that it was just easier to use a Stargate. Like, why would we? So it's I think it's really interesting that you went with like the same type of theme there. So that's like really cool.
I don't.
Yeah.
I have not seen that series yet. And when I finish writing this book,
Cool.
I'm going to watch it. But I don't want to be distracted by something because a couple of people have said, "Oh, what you're doing is similar to Stargate." Um, and but but I don't want to be distracted by their similarities to what I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when
I was
I'm done
just
with
talking
the
to author.
series next spring, I'll watch
Yep.
the show.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was funny because I just met an author. I've interviewed like 10 authors this last 2 weeks, but so I can't remember which one, but we had just talked about that. There's another similar series to theirs. I always mention like Dirk Ashton, and I interviewed him for my first season, like episode 8, and he had mentioned that his Paternus series that he had powers that sounded so similar to Neil Gaiman's American Gods book and how the gods and stuff have powers. And he had some of the same words that some of his friends, after they read his beta version, were like, have you read American Gods? He's like, no, I know what it is. I've never read it. They're like, you might want to. So he actually went and read it. He was like, oh my gosh, somehow I came up with such similar ideas. I've never heard of anybody doing this, but like he's like, yeah, it was almost like we were the same person. And so he had to actually go and he was like, I felt like he had to change some things. So it was really interesting. But the author and I that discussed this the other day discussed something similar where he was like, no, he goes, I feel like I'm okay. He's like, I feel like nobody's mentioned that to me. Like, but like Dirks was like like verbatim. It was like really,
Yeah.
really eerie.
Yeah.
I had that with Mark Timoney. Him and I, I think it comes from where your source material is, right? Like what you grew up with, the events, the movies, the TV shows, the books, comics, toys,
Yeah.
whatever. Mark Timoney and I had that for his Blood of the Spear. Robert Jordan's a big one for us. Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance. So him and I had almost like the same words for stuff, and I was like, but they're for different terms. I was like, I don't care. Like the Void's a big one, but that's a big one for Robert Jordan. Terry Goodkind's another one him and I've read a lot of. So I always find it's always interesting, right? I want to have an author like contest, right? Where everybody comes together and we get guests to like give us like the characters, the outline of the story, and the setting. And like 4 authors come together and then we all go write the same story, but with the same outline, but then write a story and
Yeah.
then come
Yeah.
back and read it. I think that would be like the coolest experiment.
Uh-huh.
So I'm gonna have to do that this spring because I do think it's interesting when people come up with similar
It,
ideas. But I always say,
it
people
sounds
always
like
ask me
fun.
why I say cultural diffusion. Yeah, I'm like, it's cultural diffusion, right? So I think it's
Yeah.
natural that we do it. So that's cool. But I
Yeah.
love that what you're saying there though, because I just want to be clear, particularly for our audience. So you're saying that if you have the technology in the backpack with the like a power source, that you would just be able to do this mobily, right? You don't need like ley
Yeah.
lines or specific regions. You could just turn it on as long as you have the power, you can go. That is,
And as long as you, I mean, you don't want to tunnel out in the middle of a brick wall. And so you have to understand the coordinate system. I think Star Trek did that really, really well with
yeah,
their ability to beam up and beam down. But again, just like warping space with relativity will it just makes your mind want to blow up when you think about how much energy, and to take a human body, every single molecule apart, turn it into an energy, and send it somewhere and then turn it back into it is a brilliant concept. Hats off to
yeah,
Roddenberry, but man, the amount of energy to do that is tough.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas the difference is that our brains, our world is three space. We sort of live in this world, but we know that space is more dimensions than just three. And we've already demonstrated quantum entanglement. And so you have to
yeah.
ask yourself, how can two particles on opposite sides of the galaxy communicate instantaneously? And in order to make yourself understand that, you have to recognize that the universe isn't what we see in our three-dimensional perspective. It is multidimensional, and so therefore, there's actually a connecting point between this side of the galaxy and the other, and that's what we do.
Yeah, yeah. I think it is interesting. I've seen a lot of studies on this. I had some friends that were I like want to I've been researching this because and combining like the science, right, with like of like the soul, right? Is like we know there's something that happens that you're here, right, with your consciousness and stuff. And even if we can't pinpoint it scientifically, right? Like they have literally done research that has shown, right, like what happens after your body that like within that process. And there's some interesting things that they found. So I found that really curious. And there's been like there was like a mother who Like this was back before the internet. I think it was like early, like 89, something like that. Her daughter lives in Brooklyn and she starts talking. She's 3. She starts talking about how in her past life she was a queen. And then this was before like Nefertiti's temple and stuff was really like a label to her. And like essentially, like if you look up the story, it's creepy. It's like then they have like she keeps saying all these things. Like I had this necklace. I was at this place, and they thought that her teachers or daycare or grandma or something was talking to her a lot about Egyptology or whatever,
Hmm.
like natural, right? Well, it turns out that really wasn't the case, and it gets weirder. So then they have a exhibit, and they take her. They're like, maybe we'll get it out of her system after like a couple years goes by, and they take her, and they had actually just discovered. I think it was Nefertiti, but they discovered a necklace, and they hadn't told anybody that that was what was on exhibit and the final exhibit. And she had
Hmm.
drawn it and stuff. So it was so interesting. Was like for like past lives and reincarnation, it was one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. But it was interesting also to see some people now scientifically try and connect the soul or those kind of things and transporting it. I've had friends where we've discussed quantum mechanics and entanglement and different things and like
Hmm.
we're like it's kind of weird, right? Like so I totally agree with you. I think that what you see, right, is not everything that's here. And I know that they've done some experiments recently that have proven that, right? So it's very
Yep.
interesting to think of the concepts, so particularly I think not just for our lives, right, but also thinking about books. So like it's always interesting to see what people are coming up with, I think, in the scientific community, because I really think and for me, like archaeologically speaking, when we're talking about things like anthropological, like there's a lot of things that have changed timelines and stuff for all of us recently. So for me, I'm like geeking out. So I think it's always fun to write those in. So it's super cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
Well,
cool.
you're actually going where I'm going to go in the fourth book is to plasma. And so
Oh,
I'm a physicist, and my graduate degree in physics was plasma. It was a long time ago, and at the time, for those who know, plasma is the fourth state of matter. And at the time, what I was doing was I was writing the first computer model of
mm,
the solar wind, how it interacts with the Earth's magnetic field. And
oh,
we
cool.
get things like the aurora borealis and things like that from it. And so at the time when I was a graduate student in physics, plasma was just the fourth state of matter and how it interacts. And in the last 10 years or so, we've come to realize that the entire universe is 99% plasma. And our
Yeah,
little world are just little tiny specks.
yeah.
What you're thinking about in saying, did you have past lives? What happens after you die? That's a really fundamental question because our thoughts are part of the energy that is the
Yeah,
plasma of the universe.
yeah.
And so the fourth book is going to be on sort of really touchy grounds because you don't want to mess with religion too much in
Mm,
sci-fi, but
yeah, yeah,
about what is the plasma, and I'll have a question in the book where somebody says, "Are you God?" And plasma will go, "No, I'm not God.
yeah.
That's another higher thing than me."
Yeah, yeah.
But understanding what plasma is, I did a little bit of it in the second book. I'm doing
Mm,
more in the third book. In the fourth book, it will almost be one of the main characters of the book. And
that's super cool.
so understanding just we're just a speck in terms of mass and in terms of the time that we live compared to plasma.
That's super cool. I had actually hadn't considered that. I studied a lot about the Greeks with like the ether, right? Like they thought that was
Yeah.
like the last step, right? For our atmosphere. And I thought, God, that's just such a cool concept. And I actually took it for a fantasy world, and I'm like, that's where the magic comes from, right? And I'm gonna do some things with it later where it becomes like Warhammer, where it's like science fiction as well. I don't want to give it away. It's gonna be super cool. But I'll have my fantasy in the
Hey.
same world later on turns into sci-fi once you get technology and stuff. You still have like the magic, right? And it comes from like the
Mhm.
ether. Well, I had a. It's so funny because I was researching, and it's just fun, right, to talk to people about stuff. And I was talking to somebody, and they were like, "Yeah, I was researching plasma, but also I got that idea from like the Greek ether." And they were like, what if the
Mhm.
Greeks had this concept, but instead of calling it, plasma, called it ether, or we're talking about like the energy of the universe. And then we just got down this
Yeah.
rabbit. I was like, that is so, it was just such an interesting concept to me. So that is like right up my alley. So that's like super, super cool. I gotta ask though, like how, because like just going back to like how you set up the story, how come you set it up where book one's kind of like its own thing and then book two, three, and four kind of go off each other? I'm just curious at what
So,
was the story behind that?
um, if you've read The Lord of the Rings, you recognize that you don't have to read The Hobbit to read the trilogy,
Yeah.
right? And so that's sort of my rationalization. The reality is, I'm a 15-time serial entrepreneur, and I was building a company that did truly amazing things. And it was time for me to step out. And when I did, I went, man, I'm finally going to write my science fiction novel. And I wrote
Yeah.
Tachyon Tunnel 1, and it was just going to be a standalone. And but then people started pinging me and said, "Hey, man, write a book. You need to do a sequel." And I'm like, "Sequel? Oh, that was a one-off." And so the more I heard that, the more I thought, okay, there is a lot more story here that I could develop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so it is reasonably valuable. In The Hobbit, you get to meet Gandalf and Bilbo and some of the characters that you're going to see later. So it's they are related, obviously, but you don't have to do one to do two.
Oh, that's cool. I was just curious because I've had other people on here who same thing. They're like, I just want to do it. I've like interviewed a couple of people this summer, like, yeah, I just want to do it just to do it. And I'm like, yeah, cool. And then they're like that same thing. They're like, yeah, I just kept having readers. I kept having sales. I kept having fans
Mm-hmm.
ask me. They're like, I didn't expect anybody to read it, and now all of a sudden people are reading it. So I'm kind of curious, because some of those people actually are probably watching today. So I'm curious as to how you started back up with like book two and how you kind of went about that process. Did you reread book one? Did you go back over notes? Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, I did go back and reread book
Mm.
one, but the there were other stories that I wanted to tell, and it
Mm.
was just going to create another book for it. And then
Yeah.
I thought, I can tie these together. And it was the summer of 23 when I published Tachyon Tunnel 1.
Oh, okay.
And it was first week of March this year when I published Tachyon Tunnel 2.
Yeah.
And I hired a publicist this time because I thought, I need to get it right. And the
Yeah.
other thing is developing characters started becoming more and more important to me as I went
Mm.
through because the first one
Yeah.
is just stories. The
Mm.
next one is a lot of character development, and the third one is just pure character development. There's great
Mm.
underlying science and the stories that wrap around the science, but the character development I think is what's most important because
Yeah.
when you start thinking about how good books work, they work partly because there's a cool story that you're always wondering, okay, what's going to happen? But they keep you engaged by getting to know the characters, by feeling the characters going,
Yeah.
okay, I know he's going to respond this way. And he kind of does
Yeah.
because you get to know him. And so I think that's the other thing that's happened as I've gone through this craft is I've learned that the descriptions and the interactions have to be really good. And in the
Mm.
first book, and I think Tolkien did the same thing in the Hobbit. It's
Yeah.
written, it's good, and but he gets much better as you go through the books.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll be honest, I had a really hard time with Lord of the Rings. Like the first one, The Fellowship, that first, like getting out of the Shire. Once you get past the Shire, it's
Uh,
golden. Once you get to Rivendell, but man, like
yeah,
it was like, holy moly. Because I'd read The Hobbit first when I was a kid. I was like in seventh grade, and oh my gosh, like that's actually I was like Star Wars, Star Trek, Sequest, like
yeah,
Indiana Jones, even right? Like they had a great book series, a young adult and otherwise. There was all sorts of like I had enough. I had so much sci-fi at my disposal. That was when all the Star Trek books were out. Like they were just going. There was
yeah.
Marvel, there was Batman, all sorts of stuff for novels, and all the movie versions of Alien, all those things. And so for me, when I discovered, my teacher, she's like, Dan, like she was very encouraging. Like you could literally I could read a whole Star Wars book in 3 days, tell her about it, and that like fulfilled my requirement. I'd be like, cool, can I move on to the next one? Like I got twice as many books in because she just let me pick, right? But her and then
Yeah.
my other English teacher for eighth grade, they really like pushed us to be like, okay, try something new. So in seventh grade, both of them encouraged me to try The Hobbit. And I also read a book called, I forget who the author was. She was amazing. It's called Knight's Word, as in fate, right? And oh, man, it was such a, I encourage everybody. She only wrote that in one other book. It's one of the greatest fantasy novels I've ever read. She had so many cool concepts, and some of them I would say were scientific with her magic system. It was really cool. But yeah, like that
Hmm.
opened up a new world for me, and it was cool. I could kind of jump back and forth. But yeah, it was. It's always interesting, I think, to see how authors do things and why they do things. Because for me, I think that's really cool to read, the first book and then to know, right, that you're continuing some of these things in that way. It's kind of like the director's cut. So I like to read now is talk to you
Hmm.
guys and,
Yeah.
and read from there because I get more as a reader, but also way more as an author because I can see exactly, like how you did things. And I think it's a really cool process to get into how you guys do things. So it's one reason why we're here, which is really cool.
Yep.
So what were some of your goals for your characters in this series and why?
Well, there are two characters that come out of the second book that were
Mm,
really important to me, and one was Megan, who in the beginning of the second book, she is all about the singularity, which in physics the singularity is a point in compression of gravitation, but in computers the singularity is when computers catch or surpass the ability of the human brain. And that's
mm,
what Megan is all about. But
interesting.
she's a character from Alaska who fell in love with a soldier who died in combat, and so she's just a wound up, tight, just gorgeous but intense individual. And so I wanted to develop that character to just to appeal to the female side of the scientific and sci-fi world, because we don't have enough just massively great female characters. In Star Trek we have Janeway, and she's amazing. The
Yeah.
and but not that many more really. And
Yeah, they're kind of
so
outnumbered there.
yeah, and so that's what I want to do with her. But my other main character is a guy named Alex, who's just the quintessential engineer. You throw a problem at him, he figures out how to solve it.
Yeah.
And so take two people like that and put them together, and now you start having the problems of the galaxy thrown at them, and they've got to figure out how to solve them.
Yeah.
And you know that was sort of the character development. But
Yeah.
and I think you have to have their love and the romance and the things like that. But I didn't want those two characters together because that was going to intertwine. And so a lot of people who are
Yeah.
probably seeing the clips that Lynn McGinnis, my publicist, is putting out, think, oh, Megan and Alex are together, but they're not. So
Oh,
there
interesting.
are other intertwined relationships, and that makes it more interesting because you broaden that kind
Mm.
of, because people get interested in Megan and she's got her own stuff, and they get interested in Alex and he's got it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I've had people ask me, I have a very, speaking of strong female characters, I have a very strong female character that demanded that she turn from a secondary character in a prequel novella trilogy for me. She's like, no, I'm in this whole series, and she's so formidable in very myriad of ways. I'm like, okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, but like I know people are gonna ask me, like, are these two in the male character that I wrote from the start, are these two together? I'm like, nope, and they never will be. For
Yeah.
a lot of different reasons, but for some like that you
Yeah.
mentioned there, yeah, it's like because it is even a slow burn, right? It's like eventually it fizzles out, or it becomes redundant, and then it's like if you keep
Hmm.
going, right? Yeah. So and like, yeah, there's certain times where I'm like, "Ugh, I wish they had kept them separated as characters instead of
Well,
intertwined that
and
way.
Dan, you have a geofence around you that I don't have around me, and that is you're a high school teacher. So you have to be a little
Yeah,
bit careful. I can go edgy on mine.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And but if I was a high school teacher, I wouldn't be able to do that because people would look and say, "Wait, that was a little bit too far, don't you think?" In that one scene,
Yeah.
and I don't get crazy about it, but
Oh yeah.
like a romance novel, but I take them to the edge, and it's fun to do that, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can't do it when you're a teacher of 16-year-olds.
Oh yeah, like I had a friend ask me because yeah, because I have I like had a parent ask me. I was like, they're like, what about your urban fantasy? I was like, the first Pico novella. I was like, it's kind of like borderline between. There's like a lot of violence and swearing and stuff. He's an
Mhm.
ex-Marine, so he's in the Marines then, and like there's a lot of like they just use a lot of sexual innuendo and just different
Yeah,
stuff, right? Like he's a
yeah,
Marine, right? He grows and matures over time, becomes a different person, I would say based off of a lot of his experiences. And he's not
hmm,
tropey, but like and my other character, she's actually in the military as well, which people find out later, but a different branch. But yeah, like I just tend to write like, some swearing, but mostly like PG-13. I always loved Forgotten
yeah,
Realms, Dragonlance, like Kevin Hearn for Iron Druid Chronicles is a little bit more, I would say, for like the R range. There's like,
yeah,
sexual scenes and stuff like that. So I tend to not write things with my own name that I can't like teach in class
yeah.
essentially.
There you go.
If you skip a
Yeah,
word or two, it's just like kind of worked out that way. That's just like what I like to read. Not that I don't read grimdark and stuff, but yeah, like what I like to write is really like those more clean fantasies and maybe a little bit of stuff in urban fantasy. But yeah, I can
yeah,
totally see what you're saying. I've had a lot of friends that are teachers who are authors that yeah, like they definitely have pen names. They won't do, like
yeah,
on air, camera interviews and
yeah,
stuff, which I totally get. Or sometimes they do and they just leave it as the pen name, which I totally understand. So I think that's really interesting. But yeah, it's totally
yep,
true. Well,
yeah,
I think that's, I just personally, I think that's a good idea with, I'm not saying that other characters, right? I think it just depends on the characters, right? If they do get together or don't. But yeah, I think sometimes it's good to know as an author, right? Or a writer where it's like, you just don't feel like two characters should be together for various reasons. So I always tell people, I had someone ask me that recently about mine. I'm like, no, it just, they told me literally like the two characters, like, nope, not interested for various reasons. We're great friends. We can work together really well, but that's it. So I think it's
mm,
also good to recognize that as well. So why would
yep.
fans of both the sci-fi and time traveling genres want to read your series? Why should they pick it up today?
Well, because the stories are so good, because the human interactions are so good, and because the science is believable. And
Oof.
I've taken concepts that have always been in the back of our head and brought them to the forefront and addressed them using real science. And I have a graduate degree in physics and an engineering degree, so I generally understand these things, and I know that some of the stuff that I've done is way past the edge of what my physics professors would have said, yeah, that's acceptable. But that's okay. I mean, that's what you want to do with science. You want to
Yeah,
take
yeah,
it
yeah.
past the edge.
Well, I think I just want to mention, like, just say, like, I think you have to in sci-fi because who is most likely going to be, your science fiction lovers, first of all, but also your scientists later, right? It's people that, that read science fiction, right? So if you're
Mm-hmm.
not pushing the boundary of what is possible or asking questions or, whether it's technology, interacting with other civilizations, Mission to Mars was a great movie. I thought, oh my gosh, that like there were so many things that brought up where I was like, oh, what if, Mars was like that's where we came from. Like it just gave so many historical questions to me too from a young age in like middle school.
Right.
And I think those kind of just the questions, are, really informative and formative, in certain years for people that are reading. But I also think, you're literally laying the landscape for a future science fiction genre with other authors too, right? Because people that usually read science fiction end up writing science fiction. So I just think that's such a good
Yeah.
point that you made. So I think
Yeah.
that's totally true and it's really cool. So
Yeah.
we're winding down on time, but if I don't ask this question, Michael, to you, I'd feel like I didn't do my job as an interviewer. So if you could time travel with any character in fantasy or sci-fi, who would it be and why? Who would be your time traveling companion?
That's easy. A few years ago, this movie came out called The Martian. I knew nothing about Andy Weir, but people said, "Hey, you need to go see this movie called The Martian." And I sat on the edge of my seat the whole way through
Right?
because Mark, the main character who got left on Mars, it didn't matter what happened. He engineered a solution.
Yeah,
And some of the things that he did were just so cool. The
yeah.
you know, it really was extraordinary. So it would definitely be him. Now, Weir is coming out with a new book, or the book is out now. The movie is coming out in the spring.
Oh yeah, Project Hail Mary.
Called Project Hail
Such a
Mary.
great book.
And that one is really, so you're a school teacher, so you probably love the ending. The ending
Yeah, 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 yeah. It was awesome.
didn't hit me as well as I wanted. But wow, Andy Weir, what a great writer, and what he's got to be a great engineer, and
Yeah,
creative
yeah,
thinker because
yeah,
um,
yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I had interviewed Seth Jaffe for this season as well, and he works in like aerospace and things like that, and also worked for NASA at times. And it was so funny because he actually knows people that Andy Weir, like he worked with people who Andy Weir contacted to get stuff right for the
mhm,
book or for The Martian. So we had a great conversation about that. So I think that. I read that book for the first time last year. I had seen the movie when it first came out. I loved the movie, but the book, like there were so many tiny little nuances and things that I
yeah.
liked that were different, and that ended up being like one of my favorite books. My wife, she's like, "You're more of like a aliens or Star Wars, like sci-fi fantasy, like not, like something like that. Like we're like Project Hail Mary, right up my alley, right?" She's like, "The Martian,
Hmm.
not really your thing. Why did you like it?" I was like, "I thought it was so cool from an explorer standpoint, right?" Because like that's what we did last year. We taught The Martian. We went to Spiff, which is at Cornell University, and we worked with some of their NASA consultants and just did some really cool stuff. Worked with some engineers and stuff. Our kids like engineered their own Mars habitats, which was really cool. But I was like, it's just so cool that like this is what people are doing now, and I think space exploration is really interesting because it's like we're just doing the same stuff that people did here, right? But you have the same problems. You have to overcome tech, the atmosphere, how to grow food, those
Hmm.
enduring issues. So as a historian that loves
Yeah.
science, I'm like, it was just like so cool. And I loved every problem he solved and how he solved it. I just like getting into Andy Weir's head, I think would just be awesome. I just want to like follow him around in the creative process with like how he does his
Yeah.
research, who he talks to, because yeah, both of those were just awesome. So I actually am really excited. Oh, I'm totally blanking. There's another one, right, where it's like, oh, I'm totally blanking. My friend just, oh, Artemis. We actually just got that one, so we're going to use that as a palate cleanser in between a couple bigger fantasy books by Brandon Sanderson. So I'm actually really
Mhm.
excited about that. A friend of mine, she goes, my husband hated it. He loves science. He loves science fiction. He hated it, and everything she said about why he didn't like it is exactly why I liked The Martian and Project Hail
That's
Mary. So
funny.
I'm like, I said to my friend, I was like, this is going to be our next like Andy Weir book. So I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
So Mark there, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I would love to see you and Mark together, like time traveling, like that type of character. Like that would just be like a really cool story in itself.
We could have fun. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. Well, I know we're winding down on time. I want to make sure that we definitely are mentioning. Sometimes we have people that go to the last section of this interview just to double check for what you guys got going on in the future.
Hmm.
So, do you have any news, updates, current projects, anything like that you can share with us?
Right. October 23rd, which by the time we release this will be 10 days ago
Yeah,
or
yeah,
so.
yep,
But October 23rd is the third in the Tachyon Tunnel series, the release date. And so we're having fun putting the final pieces of that together. Um, Tachyon Tunnel 2 won 7 awards, and it's up for a Cygnus Award, which is one of the great sci-fi awards.
yeah, yeah.
And so we want to try and beat that with Tachyon Tunnel 3. So that's the goal now. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
and
yeah.
then in the spring, Tachyon Tunnel.
Well, it's super cool. I do have to mention, so in the spring, like I said, I am doing live. So if you had, wanted to do like a live book launch or something like that, please keep us in mind. That's where we're trying to kind of set time aside. I would invite some other people to ask questions. We would just do like three other people. We would do like kind of like a round robin thing. I've done it for a friend of mine once, and then he needed some help, and then we're doing it again upcoming like December like 5th or something like that. So after this, so if you want anything like that in the future for the spring, just contact me. I'd love to put something together for you. They're always really fun. We'll do an hour and do like a book giveaway or something like that and chat and just get to know more, about the book and characters. So if that sounds cool, let me know and we can talk to your publicist or something about that. Be super
All
fun.
right.
I just want to say this has been really fun. When I got like your like background and stuff, I was like, oh, this is gonna be really cool. And then when I had seen the covers for both books, I was like, yeah, this is definitely my thing. I am behind, as all my audience knows, a season. So I'm wrapping up people from season 3 for reviews, or season 4, sorry. So I'm actually prepping my season 5 list. So I actually have book 1 on that for season 5. I'm actually doing I always do videos for like my upcoming reading list for the upcoming year. So
Mhm.
I think you're in my part 1, I think is what it is. So I'll send that video to you as well. And you can share
Okay.
that with whoever. So it'll be really cool. But if there's anything else that we can do for you in the meantime, please let me know. I'll send you like our podcast group on Facebook. There's a lot of people that will share stuff, or you guys can always just send stuff to me and I can share there for you guys. We got amazing people that just share everything. They're really great. But yeah, if there's anything else we can do for you in the meantime, please just let me know and we'll get it done. Make sure they send me everything that you guys need shared. I will share it on all my platforms as long as you need.
Okay.
Make sure we get the book out there. I got my systems down. It's so easy for me now to do that. And that goes for anybody in the audience. So I want to remind our audience though, make sure that when you're reading Tachyon Tunnel or Tachyon Tunnel 2, anything like that for Michael or any of our other authors or creatives, please make sure you're reviewing the product no matter what it is. It just helps everybody in the process, but particularly our
Yeah.
authors and creators. Yeah. And especially when you're talking about like, upcoming books, it's like when you have a release where you could really use some some reviews because it just helps in the
Yeah.
algorithms. So please, our audience,
It's
please make sure you do that. So
that is let me reiterate what you just said. For every single book you read, write a review.
yeah.
Write a review because it's the number one thing that authors need.
Yeah. I do that for audio too. A lot of people don't know you can do Audible as well, and you can actually. It always transfers right to Goodreads. I always make sure that I get them across all platforms, just to get you guys as many as
Mhm.
reviews as possible. So, want to make sure that's our theme the last couple seasons. We're just going to continue it. But Michael, thank you so much. This was super fun. I can't wait to talk to you in the future. I always give alumni of the podcast first dibs on the next season. Work with you guys on getting the schedule and stuff like that ahead of time. Good luck with, the wrapping up the series. Good luck with Stargate SG-1 once you're done. Can't wait to see what you think. Maybe we could do an episode with that and just tear it apart or see what was good, that kind of thing. I'd love to get your take on, some of the things in there. I think it'd be super cool. But yeah, if you
Yeah.
need anything else in the meantime, please let me know. Other than that, hope you have a good rest of the day. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Bye.